So we're going to resume with our CRUD app. So we can create and read. Maybe we'll add the ability to delete on next, because delete is typically fairly simple. To do an update will be a little bit more work. So let's add maybe delete button here. We can add a little JavaScript confirmation and then add our delete method. So I'm going to go into my foods index view, and I want to add some links over here. So in index.hbs, inside of my loop, I'll add a third column. It'll go to foods/delete. And then we want to append on the unique identifier so that each delete link is unique. So how could we do that? We'll do foods/delete and then a slash. How can we reference that? Yep, so the handlebars. Yeah, it's just underscore ID is always the primary key value. The unique identifier, because I shouldn't call it a primary key. So that'll just depend on and we'll just make the text red. Make sure you've got this slash here that I've highlighted in blue. So delete and the ID have to be separated with a slash. So that'll give us this output. And if you click it, we'll get a 404 because we don't have any kind of root handler to process a GET request. But we can see from the status bar, those IDs are appended on. If I roll my mouse from one link to the other, those ID values change. We should also add a little confirmation to this. So inside of our project, in public, we have a built-in public and JavaScripts folder. So I want to create a simple client-side JavaScript file for any client-side script we want. So I'm just going to right-click that folder. I'll create a new JavaScript file. I'll just call it JS. So we'll use the confirm. We don't need any jQuery, just plain JavaScript. Call the confirm method, pass in a string. That'll appear in that little modal window. That'll give the user an OK button that'll return true, and a cancel button that'll return false. And then we can just add a simple click handler to our delete links that attaches this function. When you click the link, you get a pop-up window. So once you've got this file created, we'll want to write a click handler on our delete links that calls our confirm delete function. We also need to add a link to this in our layout file, because right now this script file is not attached to anything. So this function will never get called. Go back to index. So we'll add this click handler. So clicking the link first runs that JavaScript function. If we try it now, it won't work because our script file is not linked. So once you've added the click handler, open up your layout file and add a script tag to include this file. That way it's available all through the site. Anywhere we add delete, we can call that method. So that'll be in the views and layout file. That's our header, footer. We have our bootstrap link. I'll just add it at the bottom of my bottom. So I'll add a link to it in my layout, and now that script file's globally available. Every view has access to it. And our path to our script file has to start with a leading slash because it's all the way back to the root public folder. So now if I try so I get this little pop-up window, cancel stops it, and clicking OK then gives me our 404. It carries on to, look at the URL. It's now trying to call our delete method. We have no get handler for delete. I'll also just put a blank heading up here because my table looks a little wonky. At least my line of my header carries over. So now we'll need a get handler for food/delete, but that is also going to need an ID parameter. Because if we're going to delete, we need an identifier. We don't want to delete all the documents. We only want to delete one document. So in our controller, we now need another get handler. So here's how we would set up this URL so that it expects a parameter. We'll prefix this with a colon. So the colon means this is not a literal string. The characters underscore ID, that's the name of a parameter. So we've already run a find method to do a query with our Mongoose model. Up here we used find. Here we use the create method for inserting a new document. Now we want to use the Mongoose model to delete the selected document. So what method do you suppose we want to call of the food model? We called find, we called create. Did a little musical interlude, no doubt. Close. It's actually not delete, but it would be a synonym for that. Yeah, you got it. So if we call remove, and now we need to pass in a little JSON object. So we're basically setting up a where clause. This was an SQL database. Remember, we're not working. It's no SQL. So we simply pass in the ID, and we get that from our request parameters. Our HTTP request has a parameter called _ID. So we're passing that value in. And in this case, we'll either get back an error or we get nothing back. If it works, our deletion will return nothing. If something went wrong, we'll get an error back. So if we got an error, we'll just handle it in the same way, log it, and write it out. What do we do if the delete works? What should the user see? I'm looking at the list of food. I don't want this anymore. I click delete. I click OK in my pop-up. What happens next? What would you want to see? So we're on this page, and I click delete. And then when I click OK, what should I see in my browser? Yeah, we'll just see the list being refreshed, and that item should be gone. So how would what's the easiest way to reload the list? It's on line 45. Envy? Right, we'll just reload the index view. So we don't actually need a delete view at all. Delete is just a method handler. So once again, we'll just take the user back to index. We'll give it a try. Duplicate parameter name. Ah, thank you. I do. Thanks, Blair. I'll add something new just so that I can delete it. I click cancel, nothing happens. I click OK. The page reloads, but it happens so quickly it looks like it's just disappeared. So now we can do 3 of the 4 CRUD operations. We can create, we can read, we can delete. We still can't update anything. So for this, we're going to need a page for editing a get handler and a post handler. A get handler will load the form and populate it with the name and country, and the post handler will update the document in MongoDB. And rather than adding a specific link that says edit, maybe what we'll do is we'll just make the names of the foods clickable. So I can just click on a food name, it'll take me to a form that's populated. And then we can modify it. So we'll want to modify our index.hbs. We're going to wrap this inside an anchor tag. So our link is going to go to food/edit. And we need to pass in the unique identifier of that food. So that should turn the food names into links. So now I can click on one, give them a 404. If we wanted, we could add it a separate edit link. It's a little more efficient to just make the item itself a link. So we need to build our edit form. That's pretty easy. We can copy all the HTML from the add view, paste it into a new one, and then we just need to add some code that will populate the two text boxes. We don't have to recreate all that HTML. We'll just repurpose it. So I want to set up my view, so I'm going to go to add.hbs. I'll just copy everything inside it. So I'll copy that. And inside of views, foods, I'll make edit.hbs. And we only need a little bit of code on line 6 and then line 10. What should we add here so that our form isn't blank? What attribute do we need to set? Sorry? We could do the placeholder, but then the values won't actually be in there if you save. We want to set the value attribute instead. Sorry, food, name. So we'll use our handlebars tags to inject our form values. And now we need a get handler in our controller. So when the user clicks on a food name, we can query the database, get the name and country, and then render this view, and then we can populate those two boxes. So they're not getting a blank form. They're getting a completed form that they can edit. So we just created this as a duplicative add, and we added those two value attributes. And the get handler in our controller, it's going to look similar to the get handler for delete. In both cases, we have to pass in the ID so that we know which document we're working with. In foods.js, we're going to have a get and a post handler. So we want to display populated edit form. So we're going to actually use this method, find by ID. We'll grab the ID from the URL parameter. We'll pass it in to our method. So this will query the database for this one document. We're not getting everything in the food collection, just this one. And just like with our other query, we will get back an error or a food document, one or the other. Yes, I am. Thank you. I'm missing a. Oh, I'm not. It's actually the bracket. I was missing the lambda expression. So if our query is successful and we find the document, load the edit view, and pass it the document that we've queried. And hopefully, if we've done this right, when we click on a food item now in our index view, it should take us to a page where we can now edit, and the form should be all pre-populated. So this is the result we're aiming for. Here? Okay. So we want to do two things. Once we run our query, we want to load the page, but we also need to pass it the values that are going to appear in the form. So we're writing a query here, right? We're taking the ID that comes from the URL. So we're using that ID, and this food find by ID where we pass it in, that says to MongoDB, hey, here's the ID number, right? You passed in ID number, this one that ends in 395. So use this ID and retrieve this document. So when we run the query, this find by ID, it will give us back one of two things. If it crashes, we'll have an error object. If we have no error, This is just a variable I'm using to represent the query result. So if I wanted to, I could call this like, my found query result document. You could call it anything, just represents whatever comes out of the query. So not only do we want to load the view, but the whole point of the view is to show this in the browser to the users so they can change it. So if whatever I called this here, I'm passing that to the view. Load the view and here's some data. And I've called that food. Again, it's just a variable. So in my view, I can now reference, because it's a document of, I'm just using that variable here to now display the individual elements in the document. It's being read out of here. So these are just variables used for querying the data and passing it to the view. There's nothing special about the name. You can call those, if those names are confusing and you have like a more descriptive way of explaining what they are, you can certainly use them. Doesn't matter. Did I answer your question? Okay. So now I can load this. I'll go add something new. So we need to do one last thing to kind of finish our suite of CRUD operations. What's missing? Why does this happen? Envy? It's not a redirect. We will need a redirect, but not yet. What do we need to do before the redirect? Yeah, there's no post handler. Well, we can't use put for a form. If it's an API, we could use put, but we can only use get and post for forms. So we need a post handler for the edit method that will do an update in the database. So we need our last method in this controller. So we did a post handler for add. We now need a post handler for edit with an item. Now there's a few different update methods here. We can try this. Let's see. I haven't used this before, but we could try it. There's a find one and update. We may just have to read exactly how Mongoose works with this. I've done it some different ways in the past. This method seems more efficient, so we'll maybe try it. Okay, it actually says you should use save to update documents where possible. It returns the document as it was before update was applied. So maybe we don't want to do that. We'll just use save. So there's a bunch of different ways to do this. So the first one is create a document object and then call save. We could call update one. Okay. Okay, so we could do it. We can do this. Find one and update. So we just set up our parameters. So notice the ID comes from the URL parameters, but the name and country are going to come from the request body instead of the request parameters. Those are coming from our form. And this will give us back either an error or a food document. And we'll handle this the same way we've handled the others. I haven't actually tried this syntax before, but it should work. I hope. Oops. Sorry. If our update works, we'll just reload the index view, right? Good point. Okay. Okay. Right. So there should be a. Thank you, Ryan. That's a very good point. So I think. So there's our where clause. I don't think the indenting matters. So here's the where clause, right, and here's the document. Thank you. Okay, yes, that would make more sense. Nice catch. Thank you for catching that. So update the document with this ID and give it these new values, new name value and new country value. So I'll try and run an update now and see what happens. Shrink this down so you can still see the code. So now I'm going to try my update again, try to update from tacos to fish tacos. Okay, so now this one document got updated. And now if I try to update both things, I'll insert and then try to update. So I can change either the name or the country or both. And that should be all the methods we need to write in our controller. Now our use of the countries isn't great because what happens right now, we could go ahead and add any country we want, but then that country doesn't appear here in our list. So what we're going to want to do when we come back is add some ability to also manage the countries in our application, and then potentially look at adding a drop-down list instead. So you'd first have to add the country to MongoDB, and then you could pick it from the country drop-down list. And most of what we would need to do in order to be able to do that, most of that's here. I need to show you, I think, a little bit of the syntax in the view in order to create the drop-down list, but you should be able to do most of the rest of it in terms of managing the countries. Okay, here's what we're going to do. It's 10 to 10. We're going to take a break here. I will push to Git, and we'll look at adding some of that functionality around managing the countries when we come back. Rather than me doing it, you guys are going to do it.